Never underestimate the power of...
Hello YouTube. This is gonna be an extremely long video. I'm currently updating every single matchup in my guide to the current patch 12.04, and we're gonna do separate guides. But here I'm gonna talk about every single matchup, what you should do about them, what's special about it. And you can look at the timestamp below. This is probably like a 1 hour or 2 hour video, to be honest. It's gonna take way too much fucking time, especially if we're gonna cut between the champions, but that's okay. Just go towards what champion you want. And yeah, I'll begin. I might banter with my chat. Sorry, I'm just gonna go insane if I do it strictly. So let's begin with Aatrox. Aatrox is a difficult matchup. Noah for you yesterday, he called it probably the hardest non-mage matchup. And yes, it can be pretty hard. I used to recommend PTA and I still think it's fine. However, Aatrox is the rare matchup where you actually can go phase rush. Because Aatrox is a matchup that is all about movement. So you need to max W second, you need swiftness boost and phase rush. And you're not gonna deal that much damage. Sometimes it's gonna seem like you're not dealing damage. But the thing is, if he lands one combo on you, you're fucking dead. So you need to ensure that you're as mobile as possible. And if he catches you, you can run out of his combo. It doesn't matter if you're 20 and 0 and are full damage. If he gets a combo onto you, you're fucked. So that's why I recommend swiftness boots, phase rush, and W max second. You need to be aware of his Q and dodge accordingly. As the lane progresses, Aatrox will become more aware of your dodging patterns, so try to be unpredictable. If you get hit by one wrong combo, you either die, blow your flash, or have to bait, so your movement is crucial if you want to win. If you get caught by his W, I recommend flashing early, because worst case, you might flash and then still get pulled back. This happens to me quite a bit. Only take fights when you have Ignite. This matchup is difficult. I could even put it into the extreme category for the average Teemo. But the thing is, it's very difficult if I play against the best Aatrox on EU West. If I don't play against the best Aatrox, I can manage the lane. I think a lot of Aatroxes are gonna play pretty poorly. And that's why you don't need to be as scared of him. And I think that's why it's only major. But a perfectly played Aatrox is very scary. So Akali, she's pretty difficult, and again, movement is pretty important. If you get hit by everything, you're probably gonna die. You can buy Ruby Crystal on your first base to make the level 6 easier for you. In general, I think with PTA Ignite, usually you can just stand your ground and attack her. When she ults onto you or she tries to E onto you, always place the shroom on top of yourself because she can't dodge it. And yeah, in general, try to avoid the E because her E got buffed a lot of times and it's extremely strong now. In general, you can often bait out her Q, and in the early game, her Q is the only way to farm minions. So force her to make a decision to either Q you or the minion wave. 3-6, you're for sure stronger, so try to poke a lot. Don't try to flash Akali ult. So with this I mean the second part of her ult. Because usually you can't react to her ult because the damage is instant. So you can only do a predictive flash. But usually you try to predict her ult and then she just waits a second and she ults you anyway. So usually it's kinda cringe. You really don't want to use your flash and then still die. Shroom on yourself, early ignite, try and kill her with PTA, and usually it works out. The thing with never trade with Akali while her shroud is up, that's actually not true. You can trade with her during her shroud. Especially in the early game, she's not that strong. Actually, sometimes they feel they are too safe in their shroud, especially, again, low elo Akalis. And they're gonna stand there, but you can actually just auto-attack them to death, and after the shroud comes up, you just ignite Q and you'll kill them level 2. Sometimes you need to play around the shroud, sometimes you don't need to play around it. Akshan. Akshan is a pretty easy matchup, I would say, and you don't really need to change your approach or your build at all. Except you should take Q level 1 and put 3 points into Q, then max E. In general, he can only really kill you at level 1 and 2 by doing some sort of crazy all-in, but in general, you should beat him pretty handily. It's a bit annoying that he can go shield bow and wit's end and have quite a lot of defenses, but really you counter Akshan pretty hard. You're probably the hardest ranged counter in all of top lane. As long as he doesn't get an all-in and the snowball, you're really fine. I would also say that you should prioritize trying to dodge his Q over dealing your own damage, because if he doesn't land this Q, then his damage is really pathetic while he is blinded and he loses every trait, he doesn't proc his passive shield, and as long as he doesn't land his Q, as long as you dodge at least the second part, you're doing really well in this lane. I would say that it's actually an easy matchup, but there's a lot of small stuff where you can fuck up, and that's why here I rated an even matchup. You can go the PTA build and do perfectly fine, or you can go fleet footwork to heal up her W. In general, the most important thing about Camille is dodging her W, so baiting it out or just straight up dodging it. And just like Akali, you force her to either W the minions or W you. In general, I think I have a lot of YouTube videos with Camille, so try watching how I play the lane there. In my opinion, it's really not that hard, especially after the Teemo Q buff and the minor damage buffs. Like, Comet Camille doesn't exist anymore. When she is onto you, you can just Q her. When she is onto you, you can ult. The only thing is that Camille can spike really hard on one item. Like, Camille can spike really hard on Trinity Force, and if you still haven't based yet, you might get in trouble. But as long as you have the same items as her, you are really fine. In general, try to only Q after she has ulted, because a good Camille could actually ult your Q. So either Q her or blind her during her E or after she has ulted. Usually she will be forced to ult at some point, because if she doesn't, in my experience, you win the straight up DPS trade. It's an easy matchup, but you can fuck up in some ways. So, Cassiopeia. I think it's the worst matchup in the game. It is horrible, and if the Cassiopeia is any decent, there's no stage of the game where you can do anything against it. The only reason why I don't consistently ban Cassiopeia is because there's not enough Cassiopeia top players. It is absurd how bad this matchup is. It might be the worst matchup for any champion against any other champion. Like, it is crazy how bad this matchup is. If the Cassiopeia can play at all, it's completely unplayable. So if you got this matchup, if you're starting to get this matchup, either ban it, start banning it, perma-banning it, dodge, or do the following thing. You can try to go burst mode and to just kill her in one rotation before she can react. Usually by the time that you have Ludens. There's just two problems with that. First of all, Cassiopeia is the type of champion that can go Null Magic Mantle and Ruby Crystal and sort of defensive, and then you can't one-shot her. That's the first problem. And second of all, you can only really one-shot her if you're staying even. But you shouldn't be even. Like, you shouldn't have 100 CS at 10 minutes, because she's just poking you so much and punishing you so much that even once you get to the Ludens, I can easily see a scenario where you're level 9 with Ludens, but she's level 11 with, I don't know, Riftmaker and the Null Magic Mantle. And it's not really like you can approach her, because she's still just gonna kill you. And you also can't play at range, mid-range or close range, because she beats you at all of them. So all you can do in this matchup is try to survive for as long as you can, try to get as much XP as you can, and then try to find all-in angles or call your jungle. That's the one weakness of Cassiopeia. She is susceptible to ganks. However, be careful that, I don't know, if it's like a Fiddlesticks pre-6 gank, there is a chance that she actually 1v2s you. So be careful about that. Obviously, try to dodge her Qs and her ults. And when she does her Q in the early game and she misses, you have a small opening. But realistically, the best you can do is try and cheese her, and then maybe in the mid and late game, you can go into the side lane and just confine her to the side lane. So just by constantly pushing in the side lane, you might force her to match you, and Cassiopeia isn't going to be that happy about it, because, well, she's going to be really useful and you're going to be really useless, so she doesn't want to match you. But in general, this matchup is absolutely horrible. You used to be able to go rapid fire cannon against her, but I really don't think it's good anymore. It can work, but no. You scale really poorly and it's not worth it. It doesn't work. It used to work, but it doesn't anymore. Cho'gath might be a difficult matchup for some of you, but in my opinion, it's even. There's two different kind of Cho'gaths, and you kind of need to approach them. You can kind of approach them in the same way. So the first Cho'gath is full AP Cho'gath, and the other one is tank Cho'gath. In general, I would say I actually prefer playing against AP Cho'gath. I think tank Cho'gath can be more annoying because sometimes he gets so tanky that you just can't kill him. AP Cho'gath, I think the Cho'gath actually needs to play pretty well. And in my experience, I'm confident in my movement, and I'm very confident in killing the AP Cho'gath. Also, if Cho'gath goes full AP, if you fall behind early, you can still kinda come back. If you fall behind against tank Cho'gath, usually he's just kinda gonna overrun you. So I think AP Cho'gath is very kinda high risk for the Cho'gath, so I rather see that. I would always recommend you to go PTA with Swiftness Boots and W max second. It gives you a lot of movement speed that allows you to kill him. In general, you can also go Fleet Footwork because when he lands a Q on you, you can just heal the HP up and you get quite a lot of HP just healing up on Cho'gath. Also, after you auto-attack Cho'gath, it's easier to dodge any consequential consecutive Qs. Cho'gath, realistically, is all about his Q. As long as you dodge his Q, you're fine. You should always have vision, because there is a chance that he could just do W into Q, and if at that point you get ganked by a Jarvan 4 or something, you're pretty much dead. So always make sure you're safe from the jungler. Also, Cho'gath has a lot of sustain due to his passive in the laning phase. So I would say always to focus CS over Cho'gath. You should be harassing him a lot, but it's actually more important to CS. Once he has missed his Q, he doesn't really have a way to deal with him, so you should go very aggressive on him. Make sure you don't disrespect his ult. It is a lot of burst, and he can't kill you if he ever gets onto you. But in general, if you just move well, swiftness, W, you just dodge one Q, and then you can just all in him and kill him pretty easily. It's also very important against Cho'gath that you take cut down, because even if he is full AP, his ult is gonna give him HP, and cut down is gonna deal a lot of damage to him. I think I'm not gonna recommend it in the guide here, but you could also go boots and refillable potion instead of Doran's ring and 2 pots, so that you can proc cut down. One build that I like to do that is really greedy, but you can go boots into refillable potion, then push in the first 3 waves. If you can't kill him, you just base, you buy coal, and then you do the normal build. But the great benefit of it is that you have refillable potion and you have coal, and the matchup dynamics don't really change. You're not gonna be more likely to die. And if you get through it, you scale a lot better, and in the mid game it's a lot easier to kill him because you were very gold efficient with your items and you can proc cut down very well. You can also get Landry's and Demonic Embrace instead of Riftmaker. I'm just slightly scared if you don't go Riftmaker and instead go Landry's, you need to be really confident because you can die. If you land it, you can die. I would go Landry's because I'm cocky as fuck, and maybe I would also go Demonic Embrace, because the HP burn is really good. But I still think you can do the standard build and you're gonna deal enough damage. If you want to and he's tank, you could go Nashor's into Landry into the Demonic. But again, you could also go Nashor's into Riftmaker into Voice Staff, for example, or Zhonya, and you're still gonna do just fine. So, Darius. Darius is fun because basically you either live or you die. You either try to kill him or you run. You need to focus on one thing. For the longest time, a lot of time they just went phase rush and they tried to run away when he would press ghost. But I think running away from Darius just doesn't work. Like, he's the one who presses ghost first and you need to react to that. I don't think you can react to it that quickly, and oftentimes you just get hooked and then you have phase rush and it's hard to kite him because he has ghost and phase rush is nerfed quite a bit. So I just think you should kill him. So to kill him, PTA is the best. Movement is important in this matchup, but it's not that crazy hard. Like, obviously, you want to dodge his Q, and you want to space his E. Don't harass him under the tower, because he can flash EU. You should be fine. If he all-ins you, as long as you have PTA, Ignite, and your standard items, later on he's gonna go Ghost and Stridebreaker, and it's gonna look really scary, but just whatever it's, right? If he has Stridebreaker and building another item, you should have Nasher and Driftmaker, and I think you win the all-in. So in my opinion, it's even an easy matchup, but because there's a lot of ways to fuck up, I'm gonna call it even. By the way, chat can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Zhonya doesn't work against Darius because his ult cooldown just resets to like 5 seconds. Then he can Zhonya again. I actually don't think Zhonya is good, and you just run other stuff. Dr. Mundo is a typical juggernaut. He is just a stat check matchup. Either you have enough stats to kill him, or you don't and he runs you over. In the current state of Mundo, in the current patch, you always win the all-ins, and thus the matchup is very easy because there's very little that the Dr. Mundo can do. Maybe if tanks become giga busted, he's actually gonna become a major difficulty matchup because he's too tanky for you to kill. But in general, right now, you can just take PTA with cut down, and if he all-ins you, you ignite and you kill him. You can use Oblivion Orb later on, but I wouldn't buy it that early. I would buy it probably after you've bought Nasher. You should rush Nasher and Berserker Greaves and just kill him. As your first item, because Mundo is so weak in the early game, I don't think you need Dorn's Ring. I think you can just go Cool and scale for free. Cool is also gonna lower your HP so that cut down deals damage early game. You can just constantly push and he's gonna have some issues and you just harass him under the tower. And eventually you just kill him. Dr. Mundo is pretty simple. As long as you don't stand not behind your minion wave for whatever reason and get cute and somehow die, I mean, it's very simple. The worst case scenario against Mundo is that you go even and you have great CS. So like, it's completely fine. I think a lot of you are gonna be surprised about why I even have Diana in this list, but I played against the Diana once in my life. And it wasn't fun. The thing is, it's actually kind of hard to kill her. Like, she has a lot of stats and you can't kind of just engage onto you level 6. I don't know, I've only played this matchup one time and it didn't seem too easy. Like, Diana is... Assassins are surprisingly difficult to lane against. I don't know if you've made this experience, but I've laned against Talon top lane and Zed top lane, Diana top lane. And a lot of the time it feels like they can just survive and eventually they just all in you and oftentimes they can just win it. Diana. Diana is just your typical assassin. The lane is pretty easy, but then as soon as she gets level 6, she does have kill pressure and she does have great gank setup. I don't really know what to tell you besides building some defensives early game, farming normally, and then at 6, usually most assassins don't win the all-in, as long as you don't give them the optimal scenario. So for Diana, that means as long as she doesn't land her Q on you, she can't really all-in you. Once she all-ins you, try to ult on your spot, try to Q her, ignite her early, and usually you can win the trade, but it's a bit coin flippy. That's why I have it as an even matchup, and there's nothing really special about the Diana matchup. Try to dodge stuff, when she all-ins you, try to kill her, and then see who wins the all-in. Ekko is actually a pretty fun matchup, but it's also surprisingly hard because Ekko is an assassin that can actually clear waves really, really well, especially after like level 5 or level 9. In the early game, you're gonna have a great time, but he can clear waves quite well and then roam onto other lanes, and it's kind of hard to punish him really. Especially if the Ekko is good. Of course, if the Ekko is bad, then you just get free poke and eventually kill him. Be careful with diving him because of his W and his ult. You can blind his E, and a big part of winning trades is actually blinding his E. If you do that, usually you win. Also, of course, if he E's onto you, try to shroom yourself so that he steps into it. You can hear his W. Oftentimes, when he Ws, he actually expects you to run. So as long as you're on the same space or actually run into him, gonna miss his W, and oftentimes you can win the all-in this way. Obviously, try to dodge his ult, and if he ever goes into a bush in the lane, you need to be prepared that he's gonna W and try to go onto you. So try to respect that, but in general, you can win most trades against an Ekko in the early game, and then once it's later in the game, you just kind of farm. Gangplank. This is a very long one. It's a very complex and interesting matchup, and I actually really enjoy it because there's a huge amount of skill involved. The funny thing is, the higher elo I go against the Gangplank, the more defensive I play. So in low elo, I don't respect him at all, and I even go PTA. But if I'm in Challenger and the enemy picks Gangplank into my Teemo, I'm taking Door and Shield, Second Wind, Fleet Footwork. I'm trying to survive for my life. Like, a perfectly played Gangplank is extremely scary. But for your average person, I used to recommend Grasp, but Grasp is trash now, and you should always go Fleet Footwork, because the way this matchup works in the laning phase is that Gangplank is just constantly gonna Q you. That's just a matter of life. You can win these trades, especially if you have Door and Shield with Fleet Footwork. If you auto-Q him every time he Qs you, he's gonna chuck through his Corrupting Potion, and you're gonna win the trades. You're both gonna be low HP, but you shouldn't be scared of that. And I actively encourage you to trade in the early game, because oftentimes, as he's chugging through the Corrupting Potions, eventually there is actually a kill opportunity at around level 3 once you have crashed the wave. Gangplank is one of the very few matchups where I actually never leash. It is extremely important that you have the push, because this whole matchup gets put completely on its head if he is pushing into you. If he's pushing into you, you've already made this matchup 10 times harder. So pro tip, never leash. If your jungler asks for a leash, insult his family and then go to your lane. Like, don't leash against him. One big reason is that oftentimes he uses his passive onto minions, level 1, and this already starts stacking up his grasp. So if you come to lane late, he has grasp stacked up, you have nothing, and he starts winning the trades early. In general, with Fleet Footwork, of course, sometimes you can sacrifice a minion to make sure that you get Fleet Footwork off on him. If you struggle a lot, go Second Wind as well. Pro tip, if you go Second Wind, try to use your potions as late as possible without dying, so that you get as much value out of it as you can. Against Gangplank, it's very important that you know how to time barrels. I am very good at it. I'm very confident at it. And before level 13, where his barrels become faster, it is actually possible. I recommend you. Timing barrels is a very complicated thing, and I don't think I can verbally explain it now, but I just recommend you practice it in general. When he places a barrel in the early game, you can attack it, and he starts to panic, and he tries to set up the next barrel very quickly. And if you then just rush out, he's usually gonna fuck up. Especially if the Gangplank is worse, they usually try to barrel very quickly, so they're gonna waste barrels. A good Gangplank keeps his barrels and only uses it when they need to, but you're not gonna run into that. Gangplank, although he can get very scary, currently he's being played more as a crit champion, so even if he gets like his Essence Reaver and whatnot, as long as you have Nashers, you can usually kill him. The trades are gonna be scary, but I recommend that you actively, aggressively play against him. The only thing that you really need to be careful about is I'm encouraging you to play aggressive and to really chug down through his HP. And by trading constantly, I'm assuming that you're only gonna get hit by Qs. If you get hit by Qs and barrels, it can get pretty dicey, because then you might actually die. In the early game, you shouldn't be getting hit by barrels. You just need to have good movement to anticipate those barrels. And as soon as you see them, basically use your W and try to run. Usually you shouldn't get hit before like level 9 or something. Before he has triple barrels, etc. The movement is important. This matchup can become very difficult, but I think it's very fun. And yeah, I enjoy it a lot. I hope you guys enjoy it as well. Garen is actually a very interesting matchup for the fact that Garen is very simple. Garen has no way to beat you besides his all-in. So let's talk about how you can counter the all-in. First of all, obviously you need movement speed. So max W second and go swiftness boots. If you're feeling insecure, like if he seems good, I would go Swifties. If he seems bad, you can still go Berserker, but make sure to max W second. Then, how does he all in you, right? Well, he starts with his Q. So don't waste your blind. Only blind him when you feel that he's Qing at you, because, right, it blocks his Q damage. Then also make sure that you have shrooms set up behind you, so that once he all-ins you, you can just kite towards the shrooms. As soon as his all-in doesn't work, Garen has nothing that he can do. Garen has a lot of sustain with Thorn Shield, Second Wind, and his passive, so you really don't need to focus on killing him. All you want to do is constantly push, deny him minions, and eventually when you have Nashers and Driftmaker, you're just more useful, and Garen is just kind of useless, and there's nothing that he can really do. I've seen young Fappy play Garen against Teemo, and it was really depressing because the other Teemo was really good. He just had 160 CS at 16 minutes, and Garen was just never at a point where he could all in because he was so far behind. If you're level 11 Teemo, he's level 9 Garen, he can't do anything. Garen becomes quite a bit scarier because with Ignite, because then his execute threshold gets significantly lower, but in general, as long as you follow those steps, you're gonna be fine. In general, also level 1 or level 2, make sure you don't allow Garen to just run at you with his Q. As soon as he uses his Q on you, just run back. And it's fine. Once his Q is down, or once the initial movement speed of the Q is down, you can just go on him. Also, sometimes Garens are gonna be mad because they're like, oh, I can't do anything, and they're just gonna stand still. Make sure, whenever you can, to still auto-attack him, so that he can't proc his passive. Your poison is gonna tick for a long time, and his passive isn't gonna go active for a long time. And that's it, basically. Gnar is a very interesting matchup that is very dynamic, and I actually enjoy it quite a bit, although if both players play it optimally, basically nothing happens. Gnar is at his weakest in the early game, and I recommend you to play very, very, very aggressively in the early game. Usually you should look for a kill after his Mega Gnar transformation is over at like minute 3 to 4. Usually you can look for a kill. However, the higher level Gnar gets, the harder he gets because his Q cooldown becomes very low. So eventually he doesn't need to interact with you and he can just Q the minion wave over and over and over. The all-in with Mega Gnar at level 6 is scary, but it's not that scary. You should be able to win the all-in even if he lands everything. However, obviously you should try to position yourself in the lane so that he can't ult you into a wall. And you should try to dodge his W and the Mega Gnar form and the Q if you can. This is easier if you're within the minion wave, for example. But in general, you can win the all-in, but it is somewhat scary. You could just wait out this Mega Gnar form. If you get a kill on Gnar early game, then actually the dynamic of the Gnar matchup changes a little bit because the Gnar often still thinks that he can just all-in you normally, but that's actually not the case if you get a kill early. I've had Gnars that have all-inned me at level 7 with Mega Gnar, but what happened is the Mega Gnar ran out, I was half HP, he was half HP, but then he transformed into Mini Gnar, and that's when I was able to kill him. So if you get a bit of experience in this matchup, you can actually bait him to all in you, because their brain is hardwired to think about their strength as Mega Gnar. They don't actually think, oh, what am I gonna do once I transform? They don't think that far. So if you're a bit ahead, try to bait them into jumping into you. And then oftentimes after they transform, you can use your Ignite and kill them. Of course, try to shroom yourself when he goes into you. Once he has Hullbreaker, etc., it all becomes dicey. His cooldowns become very low. I would just farm and then see what happens in team fights. It's still a fun matchup though, and you should try to use your early game advantage to bait him into overextending in the mid game. This matchup is better if you're on blue side, because you can actually ask for your jungler to come top lane to dive level 3 or level 4 under the tower, which is harder than if you're on red side. Gragas can be a very fun matchup, and it can be a very frustrating matchup. There is Tank Gragas and Mage Gragas, and honestly both are about equally as bad for you. Tank Gragas, in my opinion, is even more annoying because it's very hard to kill through Fimbulwinter, while Everfrost Gragas is at least killable. With Gragas, the thing is he's very tanky through his passive, and he can poke you a lot with his Q. This is why I like to go Fleet Footwork to heal up all of the poke by his Q. Because Gragas is a war of attrition, and Fleet Footwork helps you win this war of attrition. I think it's very important that you bait out his Q and to make him decide whether he Qs you or the minion wave. Because as I've played this matchup myself, Gragas really wants to get to Lost Chapter, a few higher levels, and he wants to stack up his mana flow band. It is not worth it to take a trade where you both lose the same amount of HP, but he manages to proc his mana flow band. The longer you delay him getting full stacks on his mana flow band, the lower his mana regen is gonna be, and the lower he's gonna go If you play the matchup really well, he's gonna get it quite late, and you're gonna have a lot more windows to harass him because he's gonna go to really do anything. The first priority should be for sure forcing him to make decisions with his Q and to primarily dodge his Q whenever you can. Again, to stop mana flow, etc. If you're low HP and he throws a Q onto the ground, be aware that he could ult you into his Q, and that's why you need to always position yourself in a way that that is not possible. By the way, fleet footwork, small trick. If you're low HP and at your tower, you can, for example, attack the Gromp or the Crux to get a full fleet footwork heal. Also, if you're low HP and Gragas uses E in your direction, there's a very high chance that he uses E flash, so you can actually predict that and play around it. In my experience, they always go for it because Gragas mains, for some reason, they think they're very mechanically skilled if they do ult into Q or E flash, and they think they're really cool when they do it. So every single Gragas player that I've seen in low elo and high elo, they do it, and you can predict that and play around it. In general, later on, Gragas becomes quite tanky. I just recommend farming it up, especially after like level 9 or something. Your build, etc. doesn't change based on his build. Your blind actually blocks his W, so if he commits into an all-in too early, especially if you then shroom your wave, you can actually win trades pretty handsomely. The Graves matchup is pretty easy and pretty good, just like any other marksman, because you win most of the trades. The only thing you need to make sure of is that he cannot push into you. Graves has good push due to the way his auto attacks work and his Q, so you need to make sure that, first of all, you don't leash. If Graves gets to just constantly push with his Q, he's just gonna neutralize the lane, he's gonna farm, he's gonna scale, and the matchup suddenly isn't that easy if you're completely even and you're both like level 13 or something, because he does get a lot of burst. So make sure that you never leash, that you're always pushing, and if he's auto-attacking the minions constantly, while you're harassing him, make sure that you also keep pushing. Wave should never be pushing into you, and you should never be at an XP disadvantage. So as long as he doesn't push and you don't stand next to a wall, you can win basically any trade that he goes for. You just constantly auto-Q him. You can even often set up dives. Make sure that you don't go for an all-in on the tower while his W is up, because it can fuck you up quite a bit. Actually, if you place it correctly, make sure not to stand next to walls. And small tidbit, if he's standing right in your face and you Q him, there's a chance that he actually still hits you with a shotgun. So try to keep a certain minimum distance between you and him. And obviously stand behind your minions. And yeah, this is basically Graves, a pretty easy matchup. Gwen is a matchup that should be really easy, but because Gwen is kind of broken right now and builds really nice items with really good runes for her, currently the matchup is somewhat difficult / even. There are a few things that you need to consider in this matchup. The first thing is, once she has 4 stacks, very often she goes for an EQ. Obviously, you don't want to stand in the middle. So move it, anticipate it. Then she can try to all-in you level 1. This shouldn't work as long as you go Q level 1. So as long as you don't see how she plays the matchup, if she plays passive, you can go E. If she plays aggressive, you have to go Q. So don't level early. You don't need to put multiple points into Q. You can just go E, standard PTA. You don't need any other item. You can go full glass cannon. Another thing is, if you fire your Q and she presses W and you're not inside her W range, your Q is gonna disappear, so be careful there. In general, if you have Ignite, usually they go Flash Teleport, right? If you have Ignite and your Q, and you save your Flash for her last ult, you should win most of her all-ins. Of course, first try to kite her, don't just randomly run into her. Another important fact is that a lot of Gwen's power lies in her W. If you can force her to use her W early, then for the next 20 seconds she can't do anything against you and she's not gonna all in you. So every time her W is down, you have a big window to trade early. If they have a lot of healers, you might consider buying Oblivion Orb, but it's not so necessary. It does have a lot of healing, so once you've killed her once with Ignite, you should wait until you have your Ignite back up to go kill her. And yeah, be wary of her all-ins, but you should win them if you play them correctly. So Fiora is a pretty fun matchup, actually. It's a very high skill matchup because a lot of it just gets decided by your movement, by your repositioning, and how you play around Fiora W. This is the first matchup where I actually give advice with the pay-to-win skins, because some skins have different audio visuals on the queue and can make this matchup easier or harder. The only other matchup where I consider it is Yasuo Windwall, because he also needs to use his W reactively to block your Q. So there are some Teemo skins that have a harder to see Q that is also quieter. For example, the new Firecracker Teemo skin has a quieter one. Or the Recon Teemo skin, or I think the Cottontail Teemo skin, they all have quieter Qs that are harder to see because they're more like whitish or blackish. Meanwhile, for example, Devil Teemo or Omega Squad Teemo or Beemo, they have pretty distinct Qs, I would say, with separate audio Qs. So because the Q is so fast nowadays after the Q buffs, a lot of Fioras that I know in high elo, they do it based on sound. So as soon as they hear your Q, they do the W. And Omega Squad Teemo especially has a very loud Q. So if you play Omega Squad against Teemo, you're actively sabotaging yourself because you make it a lot easier for them to W you. Now, there's a lot of small stuff in the Fiora matchup. For example, every time you walk outside of Fiora's passive range, you reset the vital. So imagine you're standing in front of Fiora and the vital is showing towards her. You can walk backwards, walk out of her range. When you walk back into the lane, the vital is gonna be behind you. So that's what you have to do a lot of the time to make sure that she can't proc her vital. Because if you try to auto-Q her, but she manages to get a Q and dash onto her vital, usually the healing is enough that it's not really a winning trade for you. Also, even if you manage to get a Q through while she wasn't able to W, make sure you always dodge the W because the attack speed slow is super big and it can still make you lose matchups. Another Fiora specific advice is that when she ults you, she tries to proc all 4 vitals to get the healing, right? If you stand next to a wall, it's impossible for her to proc that vital. You can also use your blind to stop her from proccing a vital and fucking up all of her plans. In general, she kinda tries to all-in you with the vital, so make sure you have shrooms set up behind you so that you can kite back to them. Fiora's Q also has a very high cooldown if she doesn't land it onto someone, so if you manage to auto-space her and she misses her Q, that is a huge window that you should abuse to go onto her. In general, Fiora all-ins in my experience get defined by 2 Qs, so you want to get 2 Qs through before she actually dies, so that's why Zhonya's can be useful to wait out the ult duration and to wait out the Q cooldown. Because you will be able to Q twice, but Fiora can only W once. Usually if Fiora was able to parry your blind, you should try to run as fast as possible, because usually that ends up very, very poorly. Fiora is a very skill-intensive matchup that is pretty fun. And there's a lot of small mechanical depth in it, and you just need to play it a lot because it can be very complicated, but it's not so hard. It's not so unfair. You might be surprised to see Hecarim as a matchup, but for some duration Hecarim was actually pretty popular in the top lane because his W gave him a lot of healing, he had great DPS, and it wasn't the easiest matchup because it seemed like you could just kill him, right? He has no real way to get onto you. But one big problem with the Hecarim matchup is that you cannot blind his E. So you can't stop very large part of his burst. By the way, it makes me really mad, and I really hate that you can't block his E. It doesn't make any sense. There's nothing in the wiki that says that you shouldn't be able to block his E, and it's really fucking stupid. Probably someone on Twitter will explain that to me why it doesn't work, but it shouldn't work this way. But because it works this way, it is pretty difficult. And the problem with Hecarim is that you can't really kill him. You can make him lose stuff in the early game. As in a lot of champions that have good engage, level 6 you can kinda just all in. And you don't have you can't even really flash from it because his ult is such a long range. Especially, you need to think, it's not only Hecarim, he's probably gonna have a jungler. And it's like, it's an even better gank setup than something like a Camille, right? So it can be quite difficult because you can't really quite kill him, and you need to worry about all-ins, and you need to worry about ganks. So all I can really say is do everything as standard, play the waves and stuff, everything as standard, but don't go into this lane with the expectation that you're gonna stomp the Hecarim. Rather, make sure that you always have all your flanks warded, so that you're never in a 1v2. Make sure that you farm up yourself while denying him, and that's the best you can do. If you get kills, that's great, but it's actually pretty hard to get him down, and you should outscale him over time. You might be surprised to see Heimerdinger at Extreme, but again, it's just such an annoying matchup, because Heimerdinger is a champion who you cannot stop from pushing. You can't. Eventually, he's just gonna outpush you. You have some chances in the early game, and you have to capitalize on that, okay? You can make this matchup bearable, but you need to be very precise. So, in the early game, you need to auto-attack his towers so that he replenishes them, and your long-time goal is to keep him in the lane and make him run Your only chance in this lane is to all-in him before he has the lost chapter. After that, you can only ask for a gank, but no one really wants to gank a Teemo lane against a Heimerdinger, so it is really rough. Even though you do an all-in, later on you're not really gonna be able to have extended fights against him, so you need to go burst mode to really burst him down. Even though you're gonna go burst mode, you're still gonna put all of your points into E and not into Q as normal burst mode, because you need the damage on your E to CS well, as you're constantly gonna be under the tower, and because again E is better in the all-in. You're gonna get your points into Q by the time you're level 13, and that will need to be enough to one-shot people in the mid game. But in the early game you need to constantly attack waves, try to get as much CS as you can. If you're a jungler ganks you, great. The reason why he's extreme is that nothing you do in this lane is really on your own volition. The Heimerdinger always dictates the pace of the game because he is always the one pushing, and you need to be reacting. He might fuck up and give you a certain window, but that's all you can do. You need to wait for him to fuck up. Another problem is that he can play at very high range and just be extremely safe by just spamming W. If you try to go into him, if he ever lands his E onto you while you go into him, you're just fucked. So you need to spend a lot of time to dodge all of his cooldowns, all of his abilities, and then also as he levels up his Q, you're not going to be able to kill the turrets. So you're just in a lose-lose situation where you constantly just need to get the minions and then look for openings when they open up. It's not as horrible as a Cassiopeia where you never have a chance, and Heimerdinger probably scales worse than a Cassiopeia and has slightly lower 1v2 potential, but it's a really difficult matchup where all of the potential to win the lane is only on his side, not on your side. All you can do is hope that he gives you some opening. Someone asked about Smite Tech against Heimerdinger, and no, it's bad. Ignite is just great. Heimerdinger is so bad and pushes so much that I would maybe even consider that you go teleport. You could go teleport and I wouldn't flame you if I coach you. But I still think Ignite is just so important in mid-late game to win fights, to win skirmishes, to win the 1v1 all-in. In my experience, teleport doesn't really save you. You can buy some defensives early game like a Ruby Crystal or Null Magic Mantle. But to be honest, I just like to go full AP and just flip it and just hope that it somehow works out. He misses abilities. I somehow outplay it. I don't know. So Illaoi is a pretty simple matchup. Illaoi is good against bruisers and a bunch of close range champions that she can abuse. But you're small, you have a small hitbox, you're fast, and you're ranged. So you really counter everything she wants to do. As long as you dodge her abilities, there's nothing she can do. Because you're ranged, you can also kill her passive tentacles. All you need to make sure is that you don't become too over aggressive and you just run into her with level 6. Obviously, her E is a threat and she might max it, so stay behind your minions. It's important that you don't overcommit with your harass. Like, you can just harass a bit and then go behind your minions. Again, you don't need to do a crazy big trade because usually open yourself up to get E'd. Also, dodging her abilities is more important than getting an auto attack in. So it's more important that you dodge the E and then auto attack instead of thinking, oh, I'll just go through it. However, just pushing through it is sometimes possible in the early game. We're just saying, oh, you landed your E. Well, if you want to attack my, I don't know, spirit, I'm just gonna attack you while you're attacking it. And especially in the early game when it's not max yet, you can just kill her and say, oh, well, you landed it, but you actually can't do anything. I recommend you go boots and refillable potion because, again, your movement speed is the most important part here. Also, another small tech that you can do is you max E, then 3 points into W, and then you max Q. Just make sure that you have this extra amount of movement speed, because blind is useful against her, but not that much. Overall, TLDR, just dodge her abilities and you're completely fine. Wait, let me fix my hair. Irelia is a very divisive champion. Some people think that she's the most difficult champion in the entire game to play against, and it's an extreme matchup, but I think that's absurd. For me, it's a very easy matchup, so I would even put her in minor or tiny. You might think that's absurd, but the only Irelia player in the entire world that I have problems playing against is Finn, who's basically an LEC top laner and a former Irelia one trick. Every other Irelia I consistently crush, and I've actually had problems on my YouTube before where I've had so many good games against Irelia that I didn't want to upload them onto YouTube because I just uploaded like 2 games already where I crushed in Irelia. And it was like, I'm not saying that it's a big problem, but like, you know, like I had too many good YouTube games against Irelia. So if you're curious about the matchup, definitely check out some full game commentaries against Irelia. But I'll give you advice now. You don't need to change your build at all. I still think you can just go Emax against Irelia, but I think if you go Qmax, it's a lot easier to play. I played it as well, and Qmax, you know, it's just simple. Most of her damage is Q-based, so it's not really too much of a problem. Now, one reason why this matchup is very easy for me is because I have good movement and I'm able to consistently dodge most of her E's. Another big part is that her W has very, very high base damage, like 120 damage at level 1. And she doesn't take any damage at all. So when she presses W, try to, you know, go away if you can and just wait out the W. It's really not worth it to take the damage. Every Irelia has the same brain. They're actually connected to some sort of, I don't know, Skynet, and they all have the exact same playstyle. It doesn't matter what the matchup. I think they just go in at level 6 and they just somehow hope that it works because their champion is bullshit. So you usually win the level 6 all in as long as she didn't like get a base while you didn't get a base. But realistically, you should win it. You can always just throw a shroom on yourself and Q her when she Qs onto you. Oftentimes you can get 2 Qs off because the trays are pretty long and she really doesn't have enough resources to kill you. It's very important to keep your ignite for every all-in with Irelia. You never want to like ignite for poke or like to maybe get a kill. If you need to have ignite up for an all-in. Very often, even if you're like 4-0, if you don't have ignite, please don't fight. You can go Oblivion Orb. It's an okay item, especially if they have more healing. But like, I would only go it after you have your Nash's Tooth. Just play around your ignite, and even if you've killed her, if you've killed her multiple times, she will be scared to go into you, and then just only commit for kills when you have ignite. That's basically everything. Respect her W, dodge her E, Q her when she goes onto you, throw a shroom on you when she goes onto you. Usually you can just stand your ground, and when they ult, you don't really need to run. You don't really need to run away from them into the edges of the ult. You can just stay there. Maybe one more advice. Oftentimes you know when they want to queue onto the wave, so just throw a shroom onto your wave, and that way you can deny them a bunch of CS, because if they do go there, you just kill them. But in general, if you've got some familiarity with the Irelia matchup, I really think Sometimes when the items are all fucked up, it can be a hard matchup, but right now, it's really free. And I'm really happy when I see an Irelia on the enemy team. Not like the next two matchups, Jax and Jayce. Those are horrible, man. Jax is a fascinating matchup because I cannot remember the last time I've done good against Jax. But I don't think this is due to the difficulty of the matchup and just that I like fundamentally always tend to misplay it. Nonetheless, I think the advice here is still obviously gonna be valuable. So I think in general you can go the standard PTA builds because if you go phase rush and stuff, there's a chance that you just don't have enough damage. Jax is sort of a stat ball, and one of the reasons why he's so difficult nowadays is that he has lethal tempo. Lethal tempo gives him so much DPS that even though you have your blind, it somehow feels like it doesn't do anything. He also has his own blind with his E, right? And oftentimes he just has so many stats and such an easy engage that oftentimes it just feels like you can't do anything. In general, in the laning phase, the more aggressive the Jax plays, the harder it can be. If the Jax just stays behind and constantly E's and just farms the minions, it's a pretty free matchup. Like, then I would even put it into minor. Problem is, if the Jax plays really aggressively and with lethal tempo and corrupted pot, he constantly jumps onto you with your Q, he jumps QE, etc. And for that, you need to be ready to adapt to that. And that's why I think you should go cloth armor and 4 pots. This is the only matchup where I recommend this, by the way. And if he Qs onto you, you should also go Q level 1. If he goes E, you also go E. So be careful not to level. In general, obviously when he goes onto you, you need to Q. In general, you always want to make sure that the wave is closer towards your tower, because when it's closer towards you, then the Jax can't all in. The problem is always when the wave pushes towards him, and then you're susceptible to ganks and to all-ins with lethal tempo. Now there's one trick that you can use, which is just like Tryndamere. If you have 3 points into Q, and he jumps onto you, if you Q him in a bush, you can just go invisible. This might help you, especially after level 6. If he uses his ult, he gains so many stats, and he starts ramping up his lethal tempo, that if you can actually wait out his ult and the lethal tempo decays, you can re-engage with your auto attacks, etc. And you can kind of survive like this. In general though, you want to freeze the wave and hold it close to your tower while putting at least 3 points into Q, and generally your main goal, I've never had success with really killing him. I think your goal is mostly just surviving lane and also denying a lot of CS. If you can just go even in lane but deny CS, I think you did a great job in this lane. Later on, once you have your ult, obviously you can kite back towards your shrooms, and when you all-ins you can shroom yourself, just like any other champion that all-ins you. But yeah, Jax can be very tricky, and I've had very poor success against him, even though the matchup should be manageable. Lethal tempo gets nerfed. I think it's gonna be an okay matchup. Jayce is weird. I think at some point in the game, he was like the hardest matchup in the game. Then he was really free. Like when Seeker's Arm Guard was broken, Jayce was a really easy matchup. Now he's really hard again. The problem with Jayce is that he used to be a champion that just scaled like shit and eventually outscaled and you're always happy. Nowadays, Jayce scales really well. He has an insane burst. And especially if he has phase rush, his training patterns are so uninteractive. There's not that much that you can do. Like, even if you stomp the lane, once he has Eclipse, like, it's hard to get to him. It's hard to actually land the trade. And it's up to him to misplay. So, it's actually a pretty difficult matchup. And you really need to make sure to try to get as much of an advantage as possible in the early game. First of all, to do that, you obviously need to dodge the EQ or QE, the shock blasts. And once he has missed them, you can go in. The Jayce matchup changes a lot based on if he has phase rush or not. If he doesn't have phase rush, he's a fucking idiot, and this suddenly became such a matchup, okay? Suddenly not so hard. The problem with phase rush is he does his full combo, he jumps in with his hammer, slams you back, you can't attack him, and then he runs out with phase rush. If he has Conqueror or something, you're standing next to a wave, as soon as he jumps into you, you throw a shroom on yourself, and then he gets slowed, and you can actually chase him down because all of his cooldowns are down, and you can actually kill him. This has happened a lot to me, but in high elo everyone goes phase rush, and it's a real pain in the ass because you can't really trade. If you do the same thing against Phase Rush stops slows, right? So you can run anyways. One way to negate this is to position yourself in a way that you're closer to wall, so that when he hammer forms you back, you just go right back into the wall. This is especially useful if you're at the tower. You can position yourself towards the wall if you try to look for a kill under the tower or close to the tower. But in general, once he has the Eclipse, it's very difficult. You just have to punish him as much as you can in the early game. You have to pray to Jesus that he is low elo and he doesn't run Phase Rush. If he runs First Strike, you're really happy. And in general, whenever he hammer forms in, you try to shroom yourself, you blind him when he goes in, but that's obvious. And try to stand behind your minions to not get shock blasted or just have good movement. Try to bait it out. But yeah, really difficult matchup in Season 12. And it's very popular and makes me kind of sad every time. In general, because trading patterns are so short, I kind of like Burst more. Because you can one-shot him as he jumps in instead of trying to look for some sort of long trade.
Never underestimate the power of the Scout's code. 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 2, 3, Scout's code. Code. 2, 3, 4. Yes, sir.